Overcoming the world. What does it mean to overcome the world? John 16:33 These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. This passage might seem strange and difficult to fathom, but it is quite simple, if we remember a couple of things. The key takeaway is that if Jesus has overcome the world, something better exists. Indeed, Jesus has restored perfection to the failed world system inaugurated by Satan. This might seem like a wrong interpretation. After all, the world is not perfect. But what Jesus tells us is that this world has been overcome. What it is doing does not have power over us. If we follow Jesus, we cannot be defeated. This world is natural, it is the natural world and it operates according to natural law. We are also faced with Ephesians 6:12. There are people who some might feel conflicts with the earlier passage. How can Jesus have overcome the world if we fight principalities and powers? But study the last line of the first passage. In it Jesus says that in the world we will have tribulation. So the world is not perfected or eliminated. But in Jesus, we can have peace. Of course there might be some confusion if the church thinks it is now the greatest power on earth, because Jesus overcame the world and is now handing it over to us on a silver platter. The church no doubt thought for sure that it was on the winning side, but then how does it, the church, reconcile Ephesians 6:12 For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, with the passage in John? Yet there is a way to reconcile these teachings. Just not in the way the church would prefer. If we simply realize that we were on the wrong side of the divide, then it makes sense we would be in the midst of a war. It is a battle to come out of the world, to separate out from it, as is told in 2 Corinthians 6:17 Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Revelations 18:4 And I heard another voice from heaven, saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her. And so we have to come out. There is only one way to reconcile these biblical truths, and that is by assuming God overcame the world. He has defeated it, but it still exists, and we are part of it. Therefore, we must come out of it, and to get out requires a fight, but it is not a natural fight or a fight of flesh against flesh, but a fight against nature, and in fact, a fight against our human nature. One of the biggest issues is our love of comfort and pleasure, or what the world calls hedonism. Our fight ultimately transitions us from hedonism to asceticism. But there are a dozen other terms we could use. The spiritual immature, mature into spiritual maturity. We die to the flesh and are reborn into the spirit. We are loosed on earth but are then bound in faith, in the church, and are therefore bound in heaven. The war is a war of good versus evil, or flesh versus the spirit, of believer versus unbeliever. But behind all of the bifurcated terms is the need for the spiritually mature to wrestle with the demons of their own soul. We must rise above the doubt and learn to establish faith in the church. Fear divides us, not just from others but from our mission. In this world there is always doubt and fear. God has defeated this and has given us a path to faith and confidence. Jesus overcame the world. He stands above it. We have not overcome it, we stand buried within it. Indeed, we are it or a segment of it. We need to find Jesus. Our battle is against nature and against human nature and our nature, or what is called, our flesh. This is not just an internal structure, because our fight against our flesh is also a wider battle against all the lusts of the flesh and the pride of life. Nature is an entire world system and way of thinking. Jesus overcame the world, but we are part of the world, until we are truly born again. This is the reality the church is not willing to hear. Jesus overcame the world, but he also overcame our sin nature. We have lost if we are in the flesh. But how do we know we are in the flesh? There are two indicators. In the one instance we are reborn in the Spirit. In this scenario we accept the gift of maturity. We join Jesus as a conscious decision to leave behind the things of the child, including the thoughts of a child. This is not about physical maturity, it is about spiritual maturity. And what is the key to delineating one from the other? The child is a dependent, the parent is not independent, but mature persons are not independent, they are interdependent. It is this interdependency that permits specialization. Specialization is the key to all progress. Every advancement is due to one person coming up with a better idea. Specialization allows us to focus on one thing and do it well. The spiritually immature do not want to work and do not think they ought to be compelled to support themselves. In this they remain children, regardless of their age. We cannot just claim maturity any more than can a young girl claim she is grown up because she wears her mother's shoes. We can get on the path, we can point ourselves in the right direction, but to mature requires a war against our flesh nature. Our flesh nature is the nature of the child. Nature is a system in which the spiritually immature live. But it is a system in which the strong dominate the weak. How do you give up power when you think those who will inherit your power will treat you as you treated them? These are the things we must fight against. In broad terms, the issue is faith. If we do not trust one another, how can we escape this world? We are not talking about a physical exodus, but a spiritual one. We cannot fight human nature by trying to run away. We cannot engage in a war against ourselves, by ourselves. Our options are limited. We need help. Logic requires the establishment of a church. The church is a prerequisite for a solution. We cannot fix ourselves because we are the problem. The problems of the world cannot be fixed by individuals making things better for themselves, nor yet by imposing these solutions onto others. We are not the measure of justice. We cannot judge with ourselves as the judge. We cannot save anyone through our own agency, but we can bind someone to ourselves. We can create a community, even if it is only 2 or 3 people. This we can do, and it is all we need to do. There is a tight correlation between the church, the free market, and cash accounting. We cannot be the judge lest we be judged as we judge. That is, if we evaluate people on the basis of our personal interests, that is the way they will see us. This is in essence the same as the law of the jungle. By the law of the jungle, might makes right, and the end justifies the means. Our struggle is with nature generally and our nature specifically. We need to overcome this to enter the kingdom of heaven. But we need to understand our nature is the nature of a child. We are spiritually immature, without the church. Just as our nature is flesh and our motivation is the law of the jungle, we live as greedy children always wanting more. But where does this more come from? Let's say we are children and we are dependent on others for our needs. Someone has to provide for us. This is okay if we truly are children and the care we get is done voluntarily. But what if we are adults physically and yet still wish to be treated as dependents? Then we have to conspire to create an artificial dependency relationship. This is difficult to do directly. Most adults do not want to be cornered into caring for other adults who are not part of their own family. The child has his family or charity to care for him or her. The spiritually immature must manipulate the natural order of things to extract wealth from the world, but as a spiritually immature being it needs an ally. This is the state. The problem for the state is that it needs an ally also, and it cannot find one in the spiritually mature. The state needs the resources of the spiritually mature, but it has nothing to offer in return. So it legitimizes its theft by tying it to a social agenda. The state justifies its theft by claims that it is stealing not for itself, but for some disadvantaged group, what one might call the Robin Hood defense. But having taken on the identify of the hero of the disposed and having nothing of its own to give anyone, the state is forced to take what it needs to help the indigent and pay its own costs from the bank accounts from the spiritually mature. The satanic coalition is this allegiance of the parasitic individual with the parasitic state. But to facilitate the expropriations, the state likes to tranche the private sector into an infinite number of competing modules. So, few can align with others to reduce the creations. Everyone is more focused on maximizing his or her own share relative to the other sectors than aligning with others to reduce the exactions of the state. This focus on fighting each other is what keeps us trapped in the flesh and dependent on the state. However, we need to understand how to discern the flesh from the spirit, or the spiritually mature from the spiritually immature. Technically, the difference is simple. It is the process of effecting the division that is problematical. All we have to do is remind ourselves that an adult is part of a church, or a person of faith. This is not meant in the narrow Christian sense but in the broader context of Romans 2:12-16. For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. Faith is not about a person sitting alone in a room contemplating God. We are saved in the church, by the church, and as the church, as it says in Matthew 18:18-20. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say unto you, that if two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. The church is not a static entity. It is not only not buildings or bodies, but also it is nothing solid, nor is it anything corporal. It is not of the physical world, it is a technology. The church is a mechanism created by God that takes us out of this world. We know that we are bound to this world by immaturity. We are released from this world by maturity. Only spiritual adults escape this world of the flesh. What separates the adult from the child is the adult's asceticism. The adult not only does not take from others, in an explicit way, the adult does not take from society or future generations. The person understands he or she is not special and has no right to waste, then he or she will understand the world does not belong to them. One cannot own what one does not have unlimited power over. If we do not own it, then we have a responsibility to care for it. This is all ascetics is. We minimize our use to that which is necessary and beneficial. If we do this, we will ultimately form the church and establish a path to greater spiritual maturity. The mature simply do not waste and embrace an ascetic life.